Chapter 1. Awakening in Darkness. The air was thick with the scent of decay. Xu Ming's head throbbed as he pried his eyes open, his vision blurry. The dampness in the air sent a shiver down his spine, and when he tried to move, he realized he was lying on the cold, hard ground. A faint flicker of light cast eerie shadows on the stone walls around him. Panic coiled in his chest. Where was he? His last memory was clear. He had been in his apartment, typing the final words of his horror novel before exhaustion overtook him. Had he passed out? Was this some bizarre dream? With a groan, he pushed himself up, his fingers grazing over something damp. He recoiled immediately. It was blood. Heart pounding, Xu Ming scrambled backward, only to crash into something hard. A rusted metal gate loomed behind him, sealing him inside what looked like a prison cell. Beyond the bars, the hallway stretched into darkness, its silence punctuated only by the faint sound of dripping water. The silence was suffocating. "This isn't real," he whispered. "It can't be real." His breath came in quick gasps as he reached for his chest, searching for something familiar. That's when he noticed it, the rough texture of unfamiliar fabric beneath his fingertips. Gone were his usual clothes. Instead, he wore a dark, tattered robe, the edges embroidered with an intricate silver design. The realization hit him like a crashing wave. This was not his body. Xu Ming stumbled to his feet, rushing to a small, cracked mirror hanging on the wall. What he saw made his blood run cold. The reflection staring back at him was not his own. A sharp jawline, dark eyes rimmed with exhaustion, and a face he knew all too well. Shen Wei, the villain of his own novel. The man doomed to die at the hands of the protagonist. Xu Ming's mind reeled. He knew every detail of the novel's plot, every horror lurking in its shadows. If he was here, if he was Shen Wei, a noise echoed through the corridor, a slow, deliberate tapping, like fingernails dragging along the cold stone walls. His breath hitched. He turned his head toward the hallway, every nerve in his body screaming at him to stay still. Then, a voice called out, low and smooth, laced with quiet menace. "You should not be awake yet." Xu Ming turned just as a figure emerged from the darkness. A pale hand stretched toward the bar. The air around Xu Ming turned frigid, his body stiffening with fear. He didn't know who this man was, but the danger emanating from him was suffocating. Then, with a flick of his fingers, the man gestured toward the cell door. A low, creaking sound filled the air as the metal groaned in protest. Xu Ming's breath hitched as the door swung open on its own. "Come," the stranger murmured, his voice carrying an almost hypnotic quality. "It is time for you to return." Xu Ming took an unconscious step back, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Return where?" The stranger's smirk deepened. "To where you belong." Something about the way he said those words sent ice-cold fear down Xu Ming's spine. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But before he could react, the stranger moved. In a blink, He was inside the cell, standing impossibly close. A gloved hand reached out, brushing against Xu Ming's cheek. "You smell different," the man murmured. "Fascinating." Xu Ming barely had time to process the words before darkness wrapped around him like an oppressive shroud. His vision blurred, the walls of the cell twisting as though reality itself was warping. A feeling of weightlessness overtook him, and the last thing he saw was the stranger's chilling smile before the world went black. When Xu Ming regained consciousness, he was no longer in the prison cell. He was lying on the floor of a grand candlelit hall, surrounded by figures cloaked in shadow, and sitting upon an ornate throne, watching him with piercing, unreadable eyes, was a man he never thought he'd meet so soon. Li Zhen, the protagonist of his own novel. Chapter 2, The Cursed Manor. The carriage rattled along the cobbled path, its wheels carving a path through the thick mist that clung to the earth like the grasping fingers of the dead. Xu Ming sat stiffly on the wooden bench, hands curled into the fabric of his robes. The weight of his new reality pressed against his chest with every breath. Baiwa Manor. He had written about this place in agonizing detail. The sprawling, ancient estate, with its looming pagodas and endless halls, shrouded in ghostly whispers. The stories that surrounded it were filled with chilling horrors, spirits bound to its walls by sorrow and vengeance. And now he was being delivered to its doorstep, a prisoner of the very fate he had once crafted with ink and imagination. Across from him sat Li Zhen. The exorcist was silent, his piercing gaze fixed out the window, as if watching for unseen dangers lurking in the mist. The dim lantern within the carriage cast flickering shadows across his sharp features, making him appear both ethereal and dangerously distant. Xu Ming swallowed hard. He needed information, but the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. He shifted, clearing his throat. Baiwa Manor. It's dangerous, isn't it? Li Zhen's gaze flickered toward him, assessing. You should know that better than anyone. Xu Ming froze. What do you mean? Li Zhen tilted his head slightly. It was your home. A chill crawled down Xu Ming's spine. He had assumed Baiwa Manor belonged to a powerful family or served as a cursed sanctuary for spirits. But if Shen Wei had lived there, the pieces of the story were shifting, rewriting themselves in real time. The carriage lurched to a stop. Outside, the iron gates loomed high, twisted vines coiling around their rusted bars. Beyond them, Baiwa Manor stretched into the night, its towering silhouette swallowed by the fog. Xu Ming stepped out first, his boots sinking into the damp earth. The scent of rain and decayed wood filled the air, mingling with something colder, something natural. Welcome home, Li Zhen murmured behind him. A shudder ran through Xu Ming's body as the gates creaked open. The entrance hall was exactly as he had imagined it. The moment he stepped inside, The overwhelming sense of wrongness pressed against him. The floorboards groaned beneath his weight. He turned to Li Zhen, his pulse roaring in his ears. The exorcist met his gaze evenly, unreadable. What the hell is going on? Then a voice, low, lilting, and laced with something almost fond, echoed from the grand staircase. You took your time returning. Xu Ming's breath hitched as a figure stepped into view. Dressed in elegant dark robes embroidered with silver thread, the man descended the staircase with the grace of someone who owned the world around him. His hair was bound loosely, strands falling over his sharp, delicate features. But it was his eyes, cold, knowing, and deeply amused, that sent Xu Ming's heart plummeting into his stomach. This was a character he had not written. The man stopped at the bottom step, his gaze sweeping over Xu Ming with a familiarity that made his skin crawl. Then he smiled, a slow, deliberate thing that held too many secrets. I was beginning to think you would never return to me. Xu Ming took an involuntary step back. Who are you? The man tilted his head. You don't remember. His smirk widened, and the air in the room grew heavy. Then allow me to remind you, my love. A flash of movement, Xu Ming's vision spun, and then the man was in front of him, fingers curling around his wrist like an iron shackle. Xu Ming's breath caught. The manor shifted around them, the walls pulsing like a living beast. The candles flickered, their flames twisting into unnatural shapes. Whispers slithered through the air. Welcome back. Xu Ming jerked his arm free, heart hammering. The man's touch left a lingering chill, a ghostly imprint against his skin. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his body was locked in place by the weight of the moment. Li Zhen took a step forward, placing himself between them. Enough, he commanded, his voice laced with quiet authority. The man merely chuckled. Protective, aren't we? His gaze flicked back to Xu Ming. But we have so much to discuss, don't we, Shen Wei? Xu Ming's fingers clenched at his sides. I am not Shen Wei. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes darkened. A shame. Then he turned on his heel, walking deeper into the manor. Come, he called over his shoulder. We wouldn't want to keep. Chapter 3. A Man of Ice and Fire. The silence between Xu Ming and Li Zhen stretched taut like a thread ready to snap. The exorcist's presence was solid, unwavering, a stark contrast to the shifting, living shadows of Baihua Manor. Yet, it did nothing to ease the suffocating weight pressing against Xu Ming's chest. He was trapped in a past he did not understand, surrounded by ghosts who seemed to recognize him in ways that he could not comprehend. And now there was him, the man who claimed to be his lover, the man Xu Ming had never written into the story. Who is he? Xu Ming asked at last, his voice barely above a whisper. Li Zhen's eyes flickered toward the dark corridor where the mysterious figure had disappeared. The golden glow of his sword pulsed faintly, casting elongated shadows against the walls. His name is Yan Rui. The name sent a shiver down Xu Ming's spine. It felt wrong, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it wasn't supposed to exist. He had memorized every major and minor character in the novel, and there was no Yan Rui in Baihua Manor. He is the master of this house, Li Zhen continued. And yet, not a single soul remembers when he arrived. Xu Ming's pulse quickened. That doesn't make sense. Li Zhen exhaled quietly. No, it doesn't. Xu Ming swallowed. And what does he mean by calling me his love? Li Zhen's jaw tensed, his grip tightening around his sword hilt. That is something you will have to ask him yourself. Before Xu Ming could press further, the corridor shifted around them. The walls groaned, stretching impossibly, pulling them into its depths. The manor had heard them. They walked for what felt like hours, yet time held no meaning within Baihua Manor's endless halls. The candlelight flickered with an unnatural rhythm, casting shadows that did not belong to them. Doors appeared and vanished. The paintings along the walls blinked when they weren't looking. The deeper they ventured, the colder it became. At last, the corridor opened into a grand hall. The ceiling stretched high above, adorned with intricate carvings of celestial beings tangled in a battle against unseen horrors. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting their forms with eerie clarity, and at the far end of the room stood Yan Rui, waiting. His robes were draped elegantly. Yan Rui poured the tea with unhurried grace. You don't remember me, he mused. Xu Ming met his gaze, head on. Should I? Yan Rui's smile widened. Once, you promised to never forget me. Xu Ming's breath hitched. Something deep inside him stirred. A memory just out of reach, slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. You're lying, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Yan Rui tilted his head. Am I? The tea in his cup rippled, and the air around them shifted again. A whisper curled against Xu Ming's ear. I have waited so long for you to return. He jerked back, knocking over the tea. The liquid spread across the table like ink, pooling into unfamiliar shapes, forming words he could not understand. Yan Rui exhaled softly. You don't belong to the past, Xu Ming. You are the past. Xu Ming's vision swayed. The candlelight dimmed. The shadows pressed closer. Then, a flash, and he was falling into a memory not his own. The battlefield was soaked in blood. Xu Ming stood amidst the carnage. Bodies of soldiers and spectral beings scattered across the land. The scent of iron filled his lungs. His hands trembled as he looked down. A sword. His fingers curled around the hilt, its blade stained with fresh blood. Before him, a man lay dying. Li Zhen. Xu Ming choked on a breath. No, this isn't real. This isn't my memory. But the pain was real. The anguish carved into Li Zhen's features was real. The world blurred, flickering like an old film, unraveling at its seams. Yanrui appeared before him, dressed in armor, his gaze steady. "This is what you wanted." Xu Ming shook his head wildly. "No, Yanrui stepped closer. "You swore to protect him. You swore to love him. And yet, in the end, you..." A sharp snap echoed in his skull. Xu Ming's breath left him in a violent gasp as he was wrenched back to the present. He lurched forward, nearly collapsing against the table. His vision swam, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Li Zhen caught him. "What happened?" Xu Ming tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Yanrui merely sipped his tea. "You're remembering, aren't you?" Xu Ming's entire body trembled. The images, the voice. Chapter 4. The first nightmares. The night settled like a suffocating veil over Baihua Manor. The distant howl of the wind rattled the wooden panels, and somewhere within the endless hallways, something skittered, soft, deliberate, and unnervingly near. Xu Ming lay on the unfamiliar bed, his eyes tracing the ancient carvings on the canopy above him. The room Li Zhen had granted him was eerily silent, yet the oppressive air within it made his skin prickle with unease. The manor was restless tonight. Sleep refused to claim him. Every shadow stretched in unnatural angles, shifting when he wasn't looking. The ghost bride's sorrowful whisper lingered in his ears. "Found you," and with it, an inexplicable dread settled deep in his bones. Xu Ming turned to the side, only to stiffen. The mirror across from his bed reflected the empty room, but something was wrong. He wasn't in the bed. A figure lay in his place. A corpse, its skin pale and stretched taut over sharp bones. Hollow, lifeless eyes stared directly at him. A choked gasp escaped his lips as he scrambled back, his breath fogging in the freezing air. Then the corpse smiled. Before Xu Ming could react, an unseen force wrenched him from the bed. His vision spun, and suddenly he was no longer in the room. The walls around him twisted, elongating into a dark corridor with no end in sight. The manor had swallowed him whole. He ran, bare feet against cold stone, the scent of mold and blood thick in the air. Xu Ming sprinted through the endless hallway. His breaths came in ragged gasps as shadows reached for him, whispering his name. Every door he passed was locked, the doorknobs rattling violently on their own. A child's laughter echoed ahead. Xu Ming skidded to a stop. The corridor had shifted, morphing into a dimly lit nursery. A lone rocking chair creaked by the window, moving of its own accord. The crib in the center of the room was draped in moth-eaten fabric, and the lullaby playing from the old music box sent chills crawling down his spine. A small voice whispered, "Are you here to play with me?" Xu Ming turned sharply. A little girl in an old-fashioned white dress stood by the crib, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her hands, without thinking, he lunged inside, slamming it shut behind him. Silence. His heart pounded as he pressed his back against the wood. The room was cold, damp, filled with the scent of forgotten things. A single candle flickered on a nearby table, casting jagged shadows against the walls. Then he noticed it. A journal rested on the desk, its pages yellow with age. A name was inscribed on the cover: Shen Wei. Xu Ming's breath caught. Hands trembling, he flipped it open. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, yet frantic in the later entries. He watches me in the night. I was never meant to be part of this story. Something else has rewritten the past. A sudden knock at the door made him freeze. Knock, knock, slow, methodical. Xu Ming, a voice, cold, familiar, rumbled from the other side. Li Jian. Xu Ming swallowed hard, clutching the journal to his chest. Li Jian, he called hesitantly. No response. Only the sound of the door creaking open. Li Jian stood in the doorway, his piercing gaze locked onto Xu Ming. You're not supposed to be here. Xu Ming took a cautious step back. What do you mean? Li Jian's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, an unspoken knowledge, a hint of familiarity. The manor is trying to consume you, he said finally. If you linger, it will succeed. Xu Ming glanced down at the journal. Then tell me the truth. What happened to Shen Wei? A flicker of something. Guilt crossed Li Jian's face before it vanished. He exhaled sharply. I will, but not here. He extended a hand. Xu Ming hesitated for only a moment before taking it. The warmth of Li Jian's fingers grounded him, anchoring him in a reality that threatened to slip away. The moment their hands met, the room dissolved into nothingness. Xu Ming awoke, gasping, back in his bed, as if nothing had happened. But the journal remained clutched in his hands, and from the hallway beyond his door, the ghost bride whispered once more, Found you. Chapter 5. A Love Written in Blood. The journal lay open before Xu Ming, its pages filled with desperate scrawls that spoke of secrets buried beneath the weight of history. He ran his fingers over the ink-stained words, heart pounding as he absorbed the entries of the former Shen Wei, the real Shen Wei, the man whose place he had taken. He remembers me. But he shouldn't. I was erased from the story. A shiver ran down Xu Ming's spine. His gaze flickered toward Li Jian, who stood by the dimly lit window, his back turned. The soft glow of moonlight cast sharp shadows along the planes of his face, highlighting his cold, unreadable expression. You said you would explain, Xu Ming prompted, voice barely above a whisper. Li Jian did not turn to face him. Some things are better left forgotten, Xu Ming exhaled sharply. No, he said, gripping the journal tighter. I deserve to know the truth. At last, Li Jian shifted, his piercing gaze locking onto Xu Ming's. There was something heavy in his eyes, something that made Xu Ming's breath hitch. You were never meant to exist. Silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Xu Ming's fingers curled around the journal. Then why am I here? Li Zhen took a slow step forward. Because something is trying to rewrite what was erased. Xu Ming's blood ran cold. The implications clawed at him, twisting in his gut like 1,000 restless ghosts. He had thought his transmigration was a mistake, an accident. But what if it wasn't? What if something wanted him here? And worse, what if something wanted Shen Wei gone? Before he could speak, the candlelight in the room flickered violently. A sharp gust of wind sent the pages of the journal fluttering, and a familiar whisper curled through the air. Found you. Xu Ming flinched. The ghost bride. Li Zhen moved in an instant, stepping between Xu Ming and the source of the voice. The air crackled with spiritual energy as he unsheathed his sword, the runes along its blade glowing faintly in the dim light. The shadows in the corners of the room twisted. A veil of white fabric floated in the air, her presence more suffocating than before. The ghost bride lingered, her head tilting at an unnatural angle, her hollow eyes locked onto Xu Ming. Why do you keep calling me? Xu Ming asked, his voice unsteady. The ghost's mouth moved, her voice the sound of wind through violent gust of wind knocked Xu Ming off his feet, sending him crashing into the wooden dresser. He barely registered the pain before Li Zhen's blade slashed through the air, creating a barrier of golden energy that forced the spirit back. The ghost shrieked, a mournful sound that rattled the very walls of the room. The lights flickered wildly, and for a moment, the ghost bride's face came into full view. Xu Ming's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just any ghost. It was his own face. Distorted, decayed, but undeniably him. A sickening realization dawned upon him. He wasn't just Shen Wei's replacement. He was the ghost of what Shen Wei used to be. The manor trembled. The very air seemed to collapse in on itself. The shadows lashed out like living things, seeking to drag Xu Ming into their depths. He gasped as the journal in his hands burned white hot, the ink shifting and rewriting itself in real time. I am still here. I was never erased. Xu Ming felt something coil around his wrist, icy fingers dragging him down. He choked, struggling against the unseen force pulling him into the floorboards. The weight of forgotten memories, of erased histories, threatened to consume him whole. Then, suddenly, warmth. Li Zhen's hand wrapped around his own, his grip unwavering. You are not alone. Golden light exploded outward as Li Zhen pulled him free, the spiritual energy dispersing the darkness in an instant. The ghost bride let out a final ear-piercing wail before vanishing into nothingness. Xu Ming collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The manor had gone silent again, but the tension in the air remained. Li Zhen knelt beside him, his gaze softer than before. You are not a ghost, he said firmly. You are real. Xu Ming clutched the journal to his chest. Then why do I feel like I'm disappearing? Li Zhen exhaled. Because someone, something, is trying to make sure you do. The realization settled between them like a blade waiting to strike. Xu Ming wasn't just an intruder in this world. He was a threat to whoever had rewritten history, and they were trying to erase him next. Chapter 6. The Ghost Bride's Secret. The manor's walls pulsed as if breathing. The corridors twisted into unfamiliar shapes, swallowing Xu Ming into their depths the moment he stepped past the threshold of his room. There was no sound, only the heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against his ears. Even his own footsteps were absorbed by the eerie void. Something was wrong. Li Zhen had left him with strict instructions. Stay in the room, do not wander alone, and most importantly, do not answer if something calls your name. But the journal in his hands burned with a different command. A name had rewritten itself on the cover. Lin Wei. Not Shen Wei, and certainly not Xu Ming. The walls creaked, distorting as if reacting to his thoughts. His pulse hammered against his ribs. He had spent his life weaving horror stories, but now, trapped inside one, the reality was suffocating. There was no convenient plot armor to save him, no audience to dictate his survival. He was here, in the dark belly of his own novel, living a nightmare he hadn't written. Why is the name changing? Xu Ming wondered, fingers tightening around the journal. A chill brushed the nape of his neck. Then a whisper. Lin Wei, my groom. Why did you leave me? A sobbing voice drifted through the endless hallway. It was frail and hollow, like a soul on the verge of fading. A cold breath ghosted over his ear, and Xu Ming spun on his heel, nearly colliding with the dark, shifting mass at the end of the corridor. The ghost bride. Her veil floated weightlessly, shrouding her decayed face. Her blood-stained wedding gown dragged across the floor, trailing dark, wet streaks in its wake. She stood motionless, as if waiting. A single thought slammed into Xu Ming's mind. She thinks I'm him. The journal seared against his palm, pulsing like a frantic heartbeat. The words scrawled across the pages shifted once more. I made a promise. I failed her. I was supposed to be hers, but I fell in love with him instead. Xu Ming's breath caught in his throat. His mind reeled as the pieces clicked together. Shen Wei's past wasn't just erased. It was rewritten. The ghost bride took a slow step forward, her broken nails curling inward. You promised, she crooned, her voice trembling. You swore we would be together forever. A fresh wave of dread coiled around. She was Shen Wei. No, she was the erased version of him. The one who had once existed before someone had rewritten history. Xu Ming felt the floor beneath him shift, like a giant living thing waking from its slumber. His mind spun as a realization hit him with the force of a collapsing world. I wasn't the one who replaced Shen Wei. She was. A guttural scream tore through the manor as the ghost bride lunged at him. Xu Ming had no time to think. He barely dodged as clawed fingers swiped where his face had been a second before. The walls groaned, splitting open like festering wounds, revealing rotting hands clawing their way out of the darkness. The entire manor was alive, reacting to the ghost bride's fury. He turned on his heel and ran. The corridors folded and stretched, endless. Shadows swirled like ink, forming grotesque figures that watched him with hollow, gaping mouths. The ground cracked beneath his feet, and something wet and pulsing slithered through the widening gaps. A distorted voice screeched behind him. "You took everything from me." Xu Ming felt something cold wrap around his ankle, yanking him down. He hit the ground hard, the impact rattling his skull. The ghost bride loomed over him, her face an agonized, twisting mess of sorrow and rage. "Give it back," she wept. "Give him back." Xu Ming struggled against the unseen force pinning him down. The journal was still clutched in his grip, its pages flipping wildly despite the lack of wind. His eyes darted to the last words, scrawled onto the parchment. "I loved him. He was mine. But fate took him from me." Xu Ming choked out a bitter laugh. "Fate didn't take him," he said, voice hoarse. "Someone changed the story." The ghost bride froze. Xu Ming seized his chance. With all his strength, he tore himself free, staggering back. The shadows recoiled from his touch as he lifted the journal high. "You were supposed to be the real bride, weren't you? But something changed, and now you're just another ghost, forgotten and consumed by this cursed manor." The ghost bride trembled. Her torn lips moved soundlessly before she let out a choked sob. The veil slipped from her grasp, fluttering to the ground. I don't remember," she whispered. "I was someone else before, but now." Xu Ming stepped closer, heart pounding. "You can still remember. You can fight it." Then silence. Xu Ming gasped as he shot upright, coughing violently. His vision swam before settling on the figure kneeling beside him. Li Zhen, his usually composed expression lined with worry. "You found something, didn't you?" Li Zhen murmured. Xu Ming's hands clenched around the journal. "Not something." His breath was unsteady, his heart pounding as realization settled deep in his bones. Chapter 7. The Book of Forgotten Souls. The manor was alive. Xu Ming could feel it beneath his fingertips. The walls pulsed like living flesh, the wood grain twisting as though reacting to his every breath. The journal in his grip burned with unnatural heat, and the ink on its pages shifted restlessly, rewriting itself over and over again. "I am still here. I was never erased." Li Chen stood beside him, silent and unreadable. He had pulled Xu Ming from the abyss just moments before, yet there was no relief in his eyes, only cold calculation, the weight of something ancient pressing against his rigid posture. The ghost bride had vanished, but she had left behind more than just fear. A single phrase had echoed in Xu Ming's mind as she faded into oblivion. "Help me remember." He tightened his grip on the journal. "There's something else in this house," he muttered. "Something that doesn't want us to uncover the truth." Li Zhen's gaze flickered toward the shadows lining the walls. "That we are no longer merely dealing with vengeful spirits." Xu Ming swallowed. Something rewrote history. Li Zhen exhaled sharply. "Then we must find out what." The manor's library was an endless maze of towering shelves and dust-laden tomes, each book older than the last. The air was thick with the scent of parchment and decay. The dim candlelight flickering eerily against the walls lined with forgotten knowledge. Li Jian moved with quiet precision, his fingers tracing the spines of books that should not exist in this world. Xu Ming followed closely, the weight of the journal pressed against his chest. He had spent his life writing fiction, crafting horror that would unsettle the bravest of souls. But this was different. This was real. "We're looking for something specific," Li Jian murmured. "Something that does not belong." Xu Ming's eyes flickered to the books, their titles shifting as if resisting his gaze. He reached out, his fingers hovering over a particularly thick tome bound in dark leather. The moment he touched it, a shudder ran through the room. The book's title rewrote itself before his eyes. The Book of Forgotten Souls. A chill ran down Xu Ming's spine. "This is it." Li Jian turned sharply, his expression dark. "Open it." Xu Ming hesitated, then flipped open the cover. The pages were filled with names, hundreds, thousands, each one crossed out, erased. The ink bled across the parchment like living shadows, twisting. A sudden force wrenched the book from his hands. The library groaned as the shelves trembled, books flying from their places as if thrown by unseen hands. The very walls seemed to collapse inward, shadows stretching and twisting into clawed hands that reached for him. A scream echoed from the depths of the manor. Xu Ming barely had time to react before a wave of darkness surged toward him, engulfing everything in its path. He awoke to the sensation of cold stone against his back. Blinking rapidly, Xu Ming pushed himself upright. He was no longer in the library. The towering bookshelves had vanished, replaced by a vast chamber lit by dim, flickering lanterns. The walls were lined with parchment, each sheet covered in countless names, all scribbled in frantic, desperate handwriting. In the center of the room stood a figure, cloaked in shadows. Xu Ming's breath hitched as the figure turned, revealing a face eerily familiar. It was him. Or, rather, the version of himself that had been erased. The other Xu Ming smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You shouldn't have come here." Xu Ming's pulse pounded. What are you?" The other him tilted his head. "I am the truth you were never meant to find." The walls pulsed, the names written upon them shifting, twisting. Xu Ming's name appeared again and again, rewritten over itself until the ink bled through the pages. The air thickened with something ancient, something angry. Xu Ming clenched his fists. "You were erased." The other him chuckled, the sound hollow and wrong. "Was I?" He stepped forward, the shadows clinging to him like a living thing. "Or was I simply rewritten into something else?" Xu Ming shook his head. "That's not possible." The other him smiled wider. "Isn't it?" Darkness surged from the walls, clawing toward Xu Ming. He barely had time to react before a golden light erupted between them, slicing through the shadows like a blade. Li Zhen stepped into the chamber, his sword glowing with divine energy. His expression was unreadable, but his stance was rigid, his blade aimed directly at the shadowed figure. "Step away from him," Li Zhen commanded. The other Xu Ming laughed. "Ah, the exorcist." His gaze flickered to Li Zhen, something knowing glinting in his dark eyes. "Tell me." Chapter 8. Breaking the cycle, the chamber trembled, as if the very foundation of the manor had been disturbed. The presence of the other Xu Ming, his shadowy doppelganger, the fragmented piece of the past, sent ripples through reality itself. Xu Ming's mind reeled as he stared at his double. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected a life stolen from him, a history that had been buried and rewritten. The ink on the pages of the Book of Forgotten Souls pulsed like a beating heart, threatening to consume him whole. Li Zhen stepped between them, his sword gleaming with golden energy, the very essence of an exorcist's power. "Step away from him." The shadow Xu Ming merely smiled. "You're acting as if you know which one of us belongs here." Xu Ming clenched his fists. "I do belong here." The shadow tilted his head, as if amused. "Do you?" His voice was a whisper of shifting parchment, ink smearing with every word. "You felt it, haven't you? The world pushing back against you, trying to erase you piece by piece." Xu Ming stiffened. The nightmares, the memories that weren't his, the ghost bride recognizing him as someone else. Everything had been screaming the same truth at him. He wasn't just a visitor in this world. He was a mistake. "I don't believe you," he said, voice unsteady. The shadow Xu Ming sighed, almost pitying. "It doesn't matter if you believe me. The story will correct itself, whether you want it to or not." The walls of the chamber groaned, the names inked onto the parchment, lining the room, twisting violently. The world itself was shifting, trying to reclaim what had been taken from it. Li Zhen moved swiftly, slashing his sword toward the shadow. The golden energy flared, illuminating the darkness like a dying sun. But the shadow Xu Ming merely raised a hand, and the attack scattered like mist. "Did you really think you could exorcise me?" The shadow let out a quiet laugh. "I am not a ghost. I am the memory that should never have been erased." The ground cracked beneath Xu Ming's feet. A wave of force slammed into him, sending him flying back. He hit the wall hard, gasping as pain bloomed across his ribs. The book he had been holding slipped from his grasp, landing with a sickening thud on the ground. The ink inside it bled outward, spreading like veins, reaching toward the walls. The manor screamed. Xu Ming found himself standing in the middle of a battlefield. The world around him had changed. Shen Wei's robes were torn, his body trembling from exhaustion. Li Zhen's sword was drawn, but his hands were unsteady, as if resisting the very act of lifting it. "I never wanted this," Shen Wei said, his voice hoarse, filled with an emotion Xu Ming couldn't yet name. Li Zhen's grip on his sword tightened. "You knew the prophecy." Shen Wei took a shaky step forward. "I knew what they told us. But did you ever stop to wonder if it was true?" Li Jin hesitated. A gust of wind tore through the battlefield, carrying the scent of blood and decay. The shadows at the edge of the world twisted and stretched, reaching hungrily toward them. Li Jin, Shen Wei whispered, you don't have to do this. Li Jin's knuckles turned white around his blade. It's already been written. Xu Ming's pulse pounded in his ears. He recognized this moment. It was the moment. The one where everything had changed. This was the event that had been rewritten. He wanted to scream, to move, to stop it. But he was only a spectator, watching helplessly as history unfolded before him. And then, just as the shadows surged forward to consume Shen Wei whole, something else changed. The world glitched. Xu Ming gasped as the battlefield flickered, reality twisting at its seams. The ink from the Book of Forgotten Souls bled into the sky, rewriting the past before his very eyes. The next thing he knew, he was back inside the manor. The shadow Xu Ming standing over him, his expression calm and knowing. You see now, don't you? The shadow whispered. Xu Ming's entire body shook. No, the shadow crouched beside him. You were never meant to be here. Because Shen Wei was never supposed to disappear. Someone changed fate. And now, it's trying to fix itself. Xu Ming shook his head wildly. That's not true. That can't be true. The shadow's smile was almost gentle. Then why is the world falling apart around you? As if to answer him, the walls of Baiwa Manor trembled violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across the floor. The very air shimmered, unstable. Li Jin pulled Xu Ming to his feet, his grip firm. No matter what he says, you are real. Xu Ming clung to that, to the warmth of Li Jin's touch, to the sound of his voice grounding him. But deep inside, doubt curled like a hungry beast. If Shen Wei had never... Chapter 9. The Specter's Embrace. The manor was collapsing. The walls groaned, warping like a living thing in pain. The ink that had bled from the Book of Forgotten Souls slithered across the floor, tendrils of shadow curling hungrily toward Xu Ming. The world was rewriting itself, erasing what did not belong, and that included him. Xu Ming's breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to stay upright. The ground beneath his feet cracked, revealing an abyss of endless void below. It was as if the very fabric of the story was unraveling. And at the center of it all stood his shadowed double. You feel it, don't you? The other Xu Ming whispered. His presence was darker now, more defined, as though he was feeding on the collapsing world itself. The story doesn't need you. It's already trying to erase you. Xu Ming clenched his fists. No, I won't let it. The other him chuckled. You say that, but tell me, what happens to characters who don't belong in the story? The ink slithered up Xu Ming's legs, burning cold where it touched. His mind reeled as images flashed through him. Shen Wei's fate rewritten. The ghost bride forgotten. The lost history buried beneath layers of false memories. He was never meant to exist. He was the flaw in the narrative. No, Xu Ming's voice was hoarse, but steady. I refuse to be erased. The shadow Xu Ming smirked, as if amused, then stopped me. The ink surged. Xu Ming barely managed to dodge as tendrils of blackness lashed toward him. He hit the ground hard, rolling to avoid another strike. The ink hissed as it met the floor, burning through the wood like acid. Li Zhen was beside him in an instant, his sword glowing with golden energy. "Hold on to me." Xu Ming didn't hesitate. He grasped Li Zhen's hand, the warmth grounding him as the exorcist pulled him to his feet. The moment their hands met, the ink recoiled, as if repelled by Li Zhen's presence. The shadow Xu Ming scowled. "Ah, so that's how it is." Xu Ming's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" The shadow's gaze flickered to Li Zhen. "He's keeping you tethered here. You should be disappearing, but his existence is anchoring yours." Xu Ming's breath caught. The realization settled over him like ice. Li Zhen's presence, the real mistake wasn't me. The ink writhed, resisting, but Xu Ming tightened his grip. The mistake was who rewrote the past. The moment he said it, the manors screamed. The shadow Xu Ming staggered. No. Xu Ming's mind spun as the realization fully took shape. Someone had rewritten Shen Wei's fate, erased him, and reshaped the story into something new. But they had made a mistake. They had left traces. The ghost bride's fragmented memories, the journal's rewritten words, the book of forgotten souls, which should not have existed, and Xu Ming himself. He had been dragged into this world because something had broken, and now he would fix it. The ink surged one last time, desperate and wild, but Xu Ming did not flinch. He pressed his hand to the book of forgotten souls, pouring every ounce of his will into it. Remember. The ink recoiled violently. The manor shook, shadows unraveling as the forgotten history fought to return. The past would not stay buried. A blinding light burst from the book, tearing through the ink, the shadows, the very fabric of the rewritten fate. Xu Ming felt himself being pulled, as if dragged into the heart of the story itself. And then he opened his eyes to silence. The ink was gone. The manor was still. The air smelled of rain and old parchment. Xu Ming pushed himself up, heart hammering. Li Zhen was beside him, watching him closely. It worked. Xu Ming turned, and his breath caught. The name had changed. The Book of Forgotten Souls no longer bore his name. Instead, it read, Shen Wei. The correction had been made. Xu Ming exhaled shakily. He had stopped the erasure. But what did that mean for him? Li Shen touched his shoulder. You're still here. Xu Ming swallowed. For now. But deep inside, he knew the story wasn't finished yet. Somewhere, in the echoes of a fate that had tried to erase him, something was still watching. And it wasn't done with him yet. Epilogue. Waking in Love. Xu Ming awoke to the sound of rain, soft, rhythmic, and real. For a long moment, he lay there, feeling the weight of his own body, the warmth of blankets cocooning him. The world did not shift, did not pulse like a living entity trying to erase him. There were no whispers in the dark corners of the room. It was just quiet. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar. Wooden beams, polished and unblemished, unlike the decaying structure of Baihui Manor. He turned his head, his breath catching at the sight of Li Zhen, sitting beside the bed, his sword propped against the chair he occupied. The exorcist's posture was relaxed, though his sharp gaze lingered on Xu Ming, as if he had been watching him for hours. "You're awake," Xu Ming swallowed. His throat was dry, but he managed to rasp. "Where are we?" Li Zhen exhaled softly, as if relieved. "Far from Baihui Manor. It collapsed the moment you corrected the story." The words sent a jolt through Xu Ming's chest. He pushed himself up, his mind racing. The memories were still there, of ink bleeding through reality, of the shadow that wore his face, of a history that had been rewritten over and over again. He hesitated, pressing a hand against his chest. His heartbeat was steady. He was still here. "I didn't disappear." Li Zhen's gaze darkened. "No." Xu Ming let out a slow breath. "Then what happened?" Li Zhen shifted slightly, his fingers drumming once against the armrest before he answered. "You were never meant to be erased." Xu Ming blinked. "What?" The exorcist's eyes met his. The world tried to rewrite itself because of an outside force. Something interfered long before you arrived, but when you corrected it, when you restored the past, you became part of it. Xu Ming struggled to process the implications. "So, I'm real now?" Li Zhen's lips quirked slightly, just enough for Xu Ming to realize it was the closest thing to a smile he had ever seen from the man. "You were always real." Something warm unfurled in Xu Ming's chest. He let out a short, breathless laugh. "So, what happens now?" Li Zhen regarded him for a moment before standing. He walked toward the window, pushing it open. The scent of fresh rain, for the first time since waking in this world, Xu Ming allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had found where he truly belonged. He reached out, fingers brushing against Li Zhen's. The exorcist did not pull away. Xu Ming smiled. "Then I'll stay." Outside, the rain washed away the remnants of the past. And inside, Xu Ming finally stepped forward into his future.